welcome to Creative Raids. Is our first episode of, well, actually my first podcast. Like I have been in many podcasts throughout the years, but it's the first time I'm doing it myself. So expect bloopers and mistakes and laughs in the end of it. But today we're doing our first episode. This time, me and Sophia Drake, right
Hi.
here, and Charlie can't join us today, but she's gonna be joining us in some of the episodes. So first of all, thank you, Sophia, for being a co-host with me. And shall we start with you introducing yourself a little bit?
Sure. Yeah, my name's Sophia. I've worked in games for over 10 years, mainly as someone specializing in indie development and helping indie developers to achieve their goals. But, apart from that, I love video games. I've always been a video game fan. And I've been lucky enough to do it both at home and abroad across the world, helping indie developers writing about video games, covering them, presenting, hosting, mentoring, all that kind of good stuff.
Nice. And I'm Patty Toledo. I'm the head of the creative community at PlaySense. I have been working with creative media for 32 years now. Like the longer the time gets, the more I show my age. But hey, but I have been working with games for about 10 years too. I started with music and then went to movies and theater and then games. It was, I think, a natural evolution. I started as game developer, did academia and worked in events. Sophia and I worked together in the event side as well. And although I also help indie developers as much as I can, I am usually more involved with bigger developers and publishers and people from all around the world. Sophia and I, besides the love for games, we have one good thing in common. We traveled everywhere
Yep,
and lived in many countries. Like Sophia is right now in all the way from Japan, so this is a
yep.
very international show. Um, but I wanted to start like what are like why did you choose games? Like I think it's something important for us to position ourselves. Why games? Like we landed here, but why did we decide to work with games?
I mean, for me, that's it sounds like a cliched answer, but I think games chose me, in the sense of I loved games from before I can even remember. It's something that mum and dad were very happy with, as in that there was never anything against video games in our family. Mum and dad bought me my first Game Boy, they bought us a Mega Drive, we've always loved games. And so when I was younger, I always used to think a little bit like being a football player or something like that, the way that kids have like, I'm going to be an actor, I'm going to be a football player. I always thought working in games was a bit like one of those pipe dreams. And then it sort of fell into me because of my passion. So, I'm sure over the course of this episode or others, we'll get more into it. But I sort of did my degree, then I went and lived in Japan, came back and did a master's in Japanese, and my thesis was on Nintendo and Japan's video game industry. And thanks to that research and work, I ended up landing my first role at Chilingo at EA. And so it sort of went from there, and I realized that this wasn't just a pipe dream. So I think the really short answer to the question of why games is because I always loved it. That's what it always was for me. It was my passion that sort of because I eat, breathed, and slept games. It ended up sort of finding me for a work capacity as well.
I am always surprised that you didn't end up in game development. Like you are mentoring game developers all the time, but I still think in some point of your career you're gonna be in a game company helping them develop the perfect game.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I have a lot of skills that I think are related to those sorts of things. I'd love to, do something like producer, those sorts of elements. But I think in my case, part of the reason why my sort of, I suppose, career started the way it did and took it the way it did was because what I had was this sort of overall passion and knowledge of the industry itself. So that led me, I suppose it's also, I didn't really pick the role I applied for. I was contacted by EA Chilingo to interview for the role. I didn't actually apply for it. So, you know, I think though what I'm trying to say is my broad range of knowledge meant that they wanted me to be able to go out and reach out to other developers to bring them into the project. The project there was 100% indie, where we promoted indie games on Samsung apps and sort of giving indie developers sort of a boost in exposure and a an easy way to get their game onto another platform. So because I understood kind of like multifacets of gaming from both a passion and from an academia point of view, I think it led to the idea that maybe I was one of many people in a great team that I could be there from a point of view to offer sort of knowledge, wider knowledge. I don't know, I'm guessing slightly, but I think that's why it took the route that it did. Yeah, but I would love to get into the development side. I mean, I'm not trained to actually code games, but I think from a sort of overview side of things, I think I could be of use.
I think so too, and we have this in common. But I think uh, in your case, game chose you. In my case, I kind of fell into games because of the
Yeah,
interactivity. When I decided games because I was working with music and I wanted to create a path for fans and musicians to connect better. And imagine that at that time, it wasn't like it is now with, for example, what BTS did with all the social media and connecting directly. At that time, that wasn't a thing. It was pretty much game developers on one side, the players on the other side,
yeah,
and with the music was the musicians there and the fans almost like idolizing their musicians. But I saw that in games there was this interactivity through the games. There wasn't a direct connection between game developers and players, but the games themselves were the good connection. So I ended up exploring that because I wanted the fans to have this connection with the musicians. Of course, like I we can dive into it in another episode. Of course, I failed miserably. That didn't work, but as everything goes in life, failure brings into other opportunities
yeah,
and
yeah, totally.
learning that went to it. But I find it interesting that one way or another, everybody that comes into the industry comes because they are like they they love all or some aspects of gaming
Yeah.
and like it's not like it is for other careers where people go, oh, I have to make money, so I go in that direction. Uh, but what is your favorite game? Like, if you could choose one game to play for the rest of your life, what would that be and why?
My favorite game of all time is Resident Evil 4 on the GameCube, specifically the GameCube. I know that, it's been re-released a million times, and most people, I think maybe probably fairly argue that the Wii version is the definitive version of Resident Evil 4, putting aside the recent remake. Um, for me, it's always the GameCube version. That was the original version. It has that, form factor, perfect controller. And I think Resident Evil 4 just did so many amazing things that sort of tapped into the future of gaming. So it was the first game, one of the first games to do the over the shoulder camera. So it turned it into that. It kept some of the horror elements, but did that sort of schlocky B movie horror thing quite well that Resident Evil had always really done. It also did this. So it mixed genres quite heavily. It went from like survival horror to action horror, which became a big, massive trend. It's also like for me the perfect sort of game that you don't really need any outside knowledge of Resident Evil to play. You can jump in, play it. It's a self-contained story, but it's got little nuggets there for the long-term fans of the industry. It's got great characters in there like Leon and Ada, and I won't spoil anything with if anyone has. I would say I would. I would normally have said Living Under a Rock, but I think with the remake, I think it's actually fair not to spoil anything because they've completely
True.
remade the game that's only been released, in the last couple of months. So I think it's absolutely fair not to spoil what is an amazing reimagining. But I think for me, it's Resident Evil 4. It's a game I'd play over and over again. It's one of the few games that, as a reviewer, I would give the 100%, the 10 out of 10, and not even think twice. Um, yeah, it's Resident Evil 4, but I think it's also fair for me to say that you can probably see through paraphernalia if you're watching that if we're talking of an entire series, it's Pokemon. Pokemon is led
I
my
was
life.
going to
So
say, I was
yeah,
surprised with the Resident Evil 4. I was expecting Pokemon all the way.
I mean, Pokemon is my favorite series of all time. I live and breathe Pokemon. These are all Pokemon manga. You can see the cards. The Switch is actually a limited edition Pokemon one. So no, Pokemon is my absolute favorite series. It's the reason I started learning Japanese. It's probably, the beginning of why I came to live in Japan. It's one of the things that really got me into games. Pokemon gave me everything. It gave me friends. It gave me, a sort of a fun place where I was very happy to be in and explore. And I still play them over and over again. I'm currently playing Sun and Moon, so just because I fancied it. So yeah, Resident Evil 4 is like the solo game, but Pokemon is the series. It's like if you imagine like a top 10, it's a lot of Pokemon games in there. But I can go on about favorite games for forever, just to throw a few other names in there. You've got Metal Gear Solid, you've got Mass Effect 2, you've got Legacy of Kain, Soul Reaver, Sonic 3 and Knuckles, Donkey Kong Country 2, Killer 7. So there's a lot that I love.
I know you're an encyclopedia of games. Recently, I went to Nintendo to visit, and they have, well, we couldn't film anything, and they were very strict of, like, there are things everywhere. Don't photograph. I could take a photo at the reception. That was it. But they do have a room that is a museum of all the consoles and I was looking and I told my friend from Nintendo, say, yeah, my friend Sophia has them all. I'm pretty sure at some point in her house she
I
has
hope
all of these consoles and
I have
Game
six of them
Boys
over
and
there.
64. Yeah, I
And
know.
that's here. I have the rest the same again back in the UK, but like you can see a Wii U screen, maybe you can see it down there. There's a 3DS and a Switch there, N64, Wii U, GameCube down there, yeah. Oh, there's a
But
Game Boy
it's
Advance as well.
it's an encyclopedia of games and consoles. It's amazing. Oh, but I
Yeah,
think
yours.
my favorite game, I think it's something that you can, my favorite game of all times is a game that I think nobody remembers anymore. It's called Gabriel Knight, The Beast Within. It was made by Sierra. I think it's 89 that they released.
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
and and I love that game to a point that I bought it again on Steam and played. Like, the screen is this big, all pixelated. At the time that it was released, it was wow. It was a film. It had live action. You had all the actors there. There you can go through Neuschwanstein Castle and you can see the proper castle with guiding. It was like wow. Nowadays you see this big like
Yeah, it's
it,
amazing those FMV games, like how much as like they have to be shrunk down and how much has changed. And some of them were
they
very
didn't
much.
age well.
No, I mean, I think about things like Night Trap as well. There was just a huge controversy back in the 90s on the
Yeah.
Mega CD, and now you sort of look at it and you think, why was
Why?
this such
Yeah.
a controversy? And then equally, I suppose though, I actually think on the flip, this one has aged well, and it's not FMV, but it did use that real life stuff as Mortal Kombat. I mean, you look at the new ones and they're fully 3D, but the original Mortal Kombat was like the images of the real actors placed into the game doing these insanely violent acts. Um, and obviously it caused the creation of the ASRB along with Night Trap because of its controversy. But I actually think on that front, Mortal Kombat's aged well because I think it's just a
True.
fascinating insight into the evolution of game development. But Yeah, that's a
Yeah,
different story.
and I love Mortal Kombat, but I play still Mortal Kombat, the newer versions, the same way that I played the original ones. I just want to fight. I don't care about the backstory. I don't want to go around
Oh no,
talking
I
to
love it.
people. Oh
I
no,
know.
there are certain games that all I want to do is punch people. They they are my whole like, okay, so I I have others, but I am a weird person. Like, I one of my favorite games is Yakuza, and sometimes I don't
Yeah.
want to do any of the missions. I just want to walk around and beat
Well,
people
but
on the way.
I think that's actually more common than people think. I mean, this whole like virtual tourism, I know it took a boom in COVID, but I think Yakuza, or as it's now known, like a dragon, or in Japanese, Ryugagotoku, which just means like a dragon, I think it really tapped into that virtual sort of tourism in, and I know it's a spiritual successor to Shenmue that also did that sort of thing, but we also saw that in other ways as well. Like, I mean, in many respects, Pokemon Snap tapped into that years and years ago. But I think even recently, things like Mass Effect with its photograph mode, and a lot of games have a photograph mode. In fact, Sony started promoting them in things like Tomb Raider and Uncharted. And I think that's actually been quite a clever creative development tool, because it taps into that idea that people might actually want to do more within the game than just what's being told. I mean, maybe one of the best examples actually recently is Assassin's Creed, with the sort of education part to the game. Like in Origins, you can go into ancient Egypt, and if you don't want to do the story, you can just go and explore and learn about ancient Egypt. I think that's been a very clever creative tool in recent years, that's being able to use this open world freedom of players, but without actually sort of overwhelming players. What I mean by that is, I know open world's crazy popular, but I think there's also this like tendency to just throw a bunch of pins on a map and expect people to run around and do it. And it's like, that's kind of still making me do something. Whereas the things like Yakuza and the things like, I suppose Minecraft is the epitome of this. But you know, like the Assassin's Creed example is just saying, here's a bunch of things, go do whatever you want to do. Not here's some things you have to do, but do whatever you want to do. So I can see why people like that. And I can see why people who maybe wouldn't necessarily call themselves traditional gamers enjoy that sort of element of gameplay. I think it's a very smart extra offering that developers can do, though I appreciate it, it more falls in line with developers who have a lot of resources. They can sort
True.
of be like, here's this extra thing if you just want to do it.
But I think with Unreal, like with the engines getting so close to reality, that will be more democratized than it is now,
Yeah.
because you can develop for free in Unreal, and you can create these really realistic sceneries that people can go around and save screenshots and like really create memories out of it, even if it's not from real world. Is if it is so beautiful that it can be relaxing
Yeah.
in a certain way. So I think that that is going to be more like that. I hope it will democratize more. It's kind of, I think indies could explore that so well, because they have more freedom in their creation. They are not so connected with an IP or so connected with commercial success. That could be an interesting
I
venture
mean,
for them.
definitely. And I think it's not just that there is a market for those sorts of games. I think actually the market's very strong, which for indie developers specifically, it poses interesting opportunities, but also a lot of challenges. Because in many respects, where I just use the example of Minecraft, another example that epitomizes this, here's a space, do what you want, is Animal Crossing, which, you know, was is clearly been one of the biggest games of all time, the recent one for the Switch, especially, obviously COVID played a huge part in that. But, for indies, they have this freedom of creativity, but you also have to be careful, because in many respects they could be competing with some of the bigger people. So, again, something that I'm sure we'll get into over the course of things, but is you've got to think outside the box. You can't just make an Animal Crossing. You've got to think, what's my niche within this? What is it that I can do and really do well? because I think there's a lot of opportunities in the space for people. I know lots of people who love games but don't necessarily want to be competitive. They don't really want to sort of have a challenge even. They just want to enjoy themselves. And I'm all for that. I mean, one of my favorite series is Ace Attorney, and I think Ace Attorney epitomizes that idea. I mean, of course there's a challenge and everything, but it very much is a story that you're led along and that you learn as you're going. It's the exact opposite to the freedom of experience, but it is still very much the in you just enjoy experiencing it. So I think there's a lot of opportunities in that space for just here's an experience, enjoy it, rather than here's a challenge, beat it.
That's true. That comes to what do you think is important in a game? I think it changes from people to people, but to person from person to person, but when you're looking for a new game to play, what are the key things in that game that will attract you to play it? Like not counting an IP that you already know, like brand new, what are the things that attract you in a new game?
So for me personally, I think the overall thing, which is sort of, I mean, it sounds obvious, but it does tap into something that, Miyamoto said and has said numerous times, but it's the element that it should be fun. It really should be fun, and fun differs from person to person. So only the person, the individual, will know what makes a game fun for them. Although, of course, there are clear demographics. For me, this is only me personally, and I appreciate there's a huge market in the other direction. But for me personally, my time is precious. I don't want my time wasted. Now, that can go down into a conversation about how long a game is, and I think sometimes that's valid. I think for me personally, I could say that I see a game as like a 60-hour gameplay length and it puts me off. But then I also appreciate that there's hypocrisy in that because I did just put 80 hours into Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. So, clearly the right game will see me put hundreds of hours into it. Mass Effect was over 100 hours when I played the Legendary Collection. So I think it really has nothing to do with the length of time. It's about the fact that I think that the game values my time. It's not got me wasting hours doing random quests just to pad out how long I play the game so that they can put on the box it's an 80-hour experience. If those 80 hours are all valuable, like they were when I played Mass Effect Legendary Collection, again, the second time I've played that trilogy, third time I've played that trilogy actually, or any Pokemon game or a Persona title, as long as I feel like the game is valuing my time and it's fun, that definitely attracts me to a game. Um, I think also, again, something that Nintendo does very well, but a lot of companies, in fact, Resident Evil probably taps into this very well, is offering me something that makes me feel comfortable, that makes me feel like I know what's going on, but with unique twists on it. They sort of say every Mario game is a Mario game, but it's always slightly different. And it's true. And Resident Evil 4 is very much that. We know it's Resident Evil, it has the Resident Evil DNA, but it did a few different things that I like. That I like. It's like it's comforting, but it's also new and interesting. So these are some of the things that I like in a game. I'm also, I suppose, the last thing I'd add to that is this is me. I'm a big fan of the one-player tight story experience. Now, that's not to say I only play those games. I don't. I play a wide range of games, but if it's got a really cool, interesting story, and it's like a tight experience, that's going to bring me into it. That's definitely going to interest me. If it's got something to say and it's brings me into the experience emotionally. How about
Ah,
you?
that's a good segue on the say because for me, it depends on what the game is gonna make me feel and how I wanna feel at that time. So
That's true.
I have difficulty saying, oh, I like horror games or adventure games or cozy games, or I have difficulty with that because it depends on the time and the momentum that I am and the feeling that is gonna portray to me. And that's something I think a lot of game developers are losing nowadays, that they are all about the core gameplay, the monetization, the whole thing, and they are not really asking what kind of feelings am I trying to inflict on my players. Is it a drama? Is it something emotional? Is it just fun?
Yeah.
Is it a relaxing game? So there are certain games for me that I know people love, and I absolutely cannot play even if my life depended on it. One good example is Diablo. E- Everybody goes, why? Like, yeah, a game that I I am a horrible player. I have no uh, coordination whatsoever. So if your gameplay depends on me clicking 300 things at the same time, I'm dead. And with Diablo was like that. I talked to everybody, king, went down. This is the first one. Went down the first flattest stairs and died with the first three skeletons that came. And the level of frustration, like tried that a few times and they went like, nope, 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 not for me, not because of that. Like it's fair. It's a game that is supposed to be hard, and same Dark Souls. There are games like that that are supposed to be hard, and they are for this demographic of people that want a strong challenge and they want their their frustration to be high, and they I usually prefer games that either will make me think or will make me remember things or travel or sometimes just relax. And relaxing can be different. And sometimes punching things can be really relaxing if you're stressed. But
Yeah,
sometimes
it's
I just want to walk around and see things and talk and
yeah, I think that's the beauty of games. It can offer so many different things to different people, or it can offer different things to the same person at different points. I
yep.
mean, you know, what you said is true. Like sometimes I want. I mean, one of my comfort foods is always like a game like Uncharted, like Tomb Raider, where it's like watching an Indiana Jones movie. It's an action movie, and I love everything about it. I mean, like I played recently, bit too late to the party, but I recently played not the new one, the original Star Wars Fallen Order. Loved it. It's great. I was so into it. I really didn't think I was going to be, but it really grabbed me, and I thoroughly enjoyed that. And then, and one of my favorite games of all time, and here's a great example of different things at different times. Um, One of my favorite games of all time is The Last of Us. I love the story it tells. I love the emotion, everything about it. I mean, I know a lot of people will maybe have experienced it through the TV show recently, which I think is fantastic. But I loved everything about The Last of Us when it first came out. I thought it was this well-paced, emotional story that was very much more about humanity and the depths that humanity can sink to rather than it was about the infection and the you know post-apocalyptic nature. However, I had to wait to play The Last of Us Part 2. Even though I say The Last of Us is one of my favorite games of all time, Part 2 came, we had COVID, the world was hard, and I
Scary
just couldn't.
timing, you know.
It it was, and I couldn't bring myself to play The Last of Us Part 2 at that time because I just didn't want to feel like that. And instead, what I played during COVID was I went back to my comfort foods. I played Resident Evil 3 remake. I played lots of Pokemon, and I platinumed all three and all four Uncharted. No, five. Didn't do Golden Abyss, but I did all four plus the one with Chloe. Lost Legacy, I think. Yeah. I platinumed all of them, and I platinumed all of the Batman Arkham games. I went back to my comfort food games because it made me feel good. But then equally afterwards, I'm like, okay, now I'm getting into The Last of Us. So it's yeah, I think it's just, and I also have games where I'm like, oh, it's Christmas time. I know I want to play. For example, every year I get out the Nintendo Wii at Christmas. It's just like it feels like a Christmas console. I'm like, I want to play Wii Sports Resort. I want to play Super Mario Galaxy. I want to play these sorts of games at Christmas for whatever reason it is. And I think that's the beauty of it. So I think that from a development point of view, and I get that it's totally different for the bigger sphere, but I think setting out to find who your audience is one of the most important aspects of game development. And I am actually a strong believer of saying that your audience is everyone is not a great answer. Now, that's not to say everyone shouldn't be able to enjoy your game. I think everyone should, I think, maybe not always, but I think saying everyone can enjoy this game is always a good bit. But within that, there has to be a targeted audience. Now, sometimes that can be a type of person, sometimes that can be a type of gamer, sometimes that can be people who like a certain genre, but maybe it could also be, a type of emotion, a type of time of year. It could be like this game is targeting people who want some soul food, who want to feel a bit better, or this is maybe targeting people who are, you know, um, dealing with hard emotions, or whatever it is. I think there's loads of different facets that you can do that fit loads of things. Is it a romance story? Is it, a story of struggle? Is it a fantasy story? These are all different niches, and I think, saying who is I think a great example really of this, even though it's a game I struggle with, but is Elden Ring or Dark Souls. I think clearly they know who they're targeting, but also it would be unfair to say that only people who like those really hard, challenging Soulsborne games bought Elden Ring. Clearly they didn't. You know, the George R. Martin effect, the world. I know a lot of people who bought Elden Ring because they wanted to experience the world and the lore. So there's different niches in there. But no, personally, I'm terrible at Soulsborne games, so they just end up frustrating me. And I'm not in
Yeah,
it for that
same.
challenge. But I did get Sekiro because I wanted to see the world and experience how it was. So yeah.
But it is like, yeah, I think it goes to something I wanted to talk after this, which is a lot of the game development business nowadays is based on data.
Yes.
And I don't want to brush it off. Data is important, and if you're a game developer, you should have knowledge of the data, be able to read it and interpret it in the right way. But I always wonder if this approach of the game business purely as data market monetization and user acquisition, it doesn't matter if it is mobile or other platforms, it kind of takes away a bit of the soul of the game in itself. It becomes game as a product or game as a service inside of being game as an entertainment and as a tool for expression and emotional connection as well. Like a, what do you think? Like I think the gaming industry is becoming a bit soulless at times. That's my main point.
I I agree with the notion that I don't think it should all be data driven. I think, like you say, it's important to know your data, to understand it, to adapt to the data. But I think it's always about balance, right? It's always about balance in everything. And I think that in this case, you know, so I've obviously, like I say, for years worked with indie developers. I am a mentor. I run a global competition for indie developers called the Big Indie Pitch over at Pocket Gamer. I've done that for years. Like I say, I've mentored. I've worked on programs that help indie development. And the reason I bring that up is when you see developers who are free from the data, now that prevents lots of other challenges. So getting that game to market, making it successful, you know, also being able to focus on not just the creative side, but also the business side of the industry. So there is all of those sorts of things. But just to keep on to the topic at hand about data, I think when you see creators who are not thinking about the data, you also see some of the most creative ideas come through, some really smart, clever ideas because they're not thinking about it. Now, for them, the challenge is then to also look at the data and work out how that fits with this insanely creative idea. Again, though, if you take a company that has all this data, you don't want them to lose the creative touch, because otherwise all we get is the same experience over and over and over again. Because sometimes that works, sure, sure, but then we're never pushing forward. So it's about blurring the creativity with the data. I mean, I'm definitely of the belief that, both elements are important, but it's about blending them. It's not a battle between the data and the creativity. It's not two different sides of an army fighting for supremacy in a development cycle. It's about two groups coming together and saying, we've got this super cool idea. how do we make that work with the data? And equally, it's about the data coming and saying, look, we've got some clear ideas about what works here. Have we got any cool creative ideas that will allow us to, take advantage of this data and make something new, cool, and exciting that pushes the industry forward or offers players a new experience? And a new experience doesn't have to be a whole brand new thing. It can just be the slightest twist on gameplay. It can just be like, oh, there's this cool new mechanic that's now here. And it's like, okay. Or it could even be in the way that we recently saw the retro boom. I mean, I'm a massive retro gamer. This idea that, retro's doing really well. Okay, let's go back to the old classics. But rather than just let's only re-release them. There's a market for re-releasing for sure, offering people a new opportunity to play games. But Sonic Mania was a great example of going, okay, this is what the audience want. How do we modernize it? How do we offer a slight new twist? And it worked amazing. Sonic Mania is an awesome game. That's one of my favorite games of all time too.
It's true. Yeah, I can't help but draw comparison, for example, with the music industry because I see a lot of parallels on things. Like it's very similar to you being a musician and choosing between making a hit that is what all the record companies want and all the radios will play, or doing something that is an expression of yourself and you feel proud of what you're doing, and without knowing if there is an audience for that piece of music or not. And I think in every industry, people get really divided about that between being successful and making money and doing something that they can be proud of and really be a creative outlet. And the ones that are the golden nuggets of this are the ones that are able to combine both things, do something super unique and at the same time hit certain nuggets in the market. But I feel that because there is a recession happening, we see layoffs going everywhere. The market had the down after the pandemic in every market. You see all the creative businesses doing a step back and laying on something that they know it's profitable. So going after IPs that they know, always in films you see the same thing, like doing remakes because remakes sell, or going for tradition, the pop music that everybody is doing, or going for games that you know are successful in certain ways. Is just a safety net. And
I agree. I think you're right. And I think it's clear that, like, so for example, recent, news was out that, Capcom is seeing record sales and they're putting it down to sort of tapping back into their back catalogue. And, Capcom's arguably never been stronger than it is right now. And, to use an earlier example, though, is Resident Evil 4 or even Resident Evil 3 remake, 2 remake. But I think this is where we can get a bit smarter with creativity. I think, and Sonic Mania is another great example. I think there's a big difference between just literally repackaging your old game and re-releasing it. And I think there's clearly a market for that, if depending on the age of the game, especially if it's inaccessible now. But equally, I think, simply repackaging a game that was released maybe like 5, 6, 7 years ago, I, I wonder where the value to that sometimes is if the earlier version is still accessible and all we've really done is put a HD gloss on it. Now, a lot of people like that. So there's, sure, if it works for people, it works for people. I'm not saying that that's incorrect as an option to do. I think it's perfectly fine. But what I think is better is the approach that Capcom have taken. And I think it's very easy to dismiss Capcom as just like, oh, well, it's re-releasing old games. Well, actually, Resident Evil 2, 3, 4, these have been remade from the ground up. There's a big difference between a remaster and a remake. I think re-releasing old games, I would put under just it's a remaster. We've given it a nice glossy shine. We've updated the controls, few quality of life, got rid of the bugs. Budget price tag, here you go, enjoy. Definitely a market for that. But I think what's even better is saying, okay, clearly the old IPs are strong. Clearly people want something that they're comfortable with at the moment. But what can we do? to make it new, to make it special, to tap into what's modern. And Resident Evil 4's done that. It takes a more serious approach. It reinvents, a number of the characters, most notably, not going too spoilery, but most notably the president's daughter, Ashley Graham, in the sense of before she was the typical damsel in distress. Now she has her
Annoying
own
as hell.
identity. Yeah, now
Uh,
she
she
has her own identity. Now she's a lot stronger. She feels more like a rounded, real person. So I think you can. It's. I think I said this, but it's going much more down the horror route. You've got all the new modern technologies. We've tweaked the controls to resemble that, but we've kept what you know and love about it. I think that's very much. But even as simple as like, you know, um, I suppose another good example would be, the recent Mega Man games, and I'm not referring to the collections. I mean, in like, Mega Man 10, where we're like, and so that's why Sonic Mania is such a great example. It's like, okay, let's take the old gameplay that we all know and love, but let's make it work for a modern audience. I always describe Sonic Mania as it's Sonic with the rose tinted glasses on. It's all the bits you remember loving about Sonic the Hedgehog, and none of the bits you forgot that you hated, like weird timeouts and bits that don't make sense or anything like that. Now, I say that as a mega Sonic fan, a huge Sonic fan. So for me, Sonic Mania is an easy 10 out of 10, but I actually believe that I would recommend Sonic even to people who said they didn't once like Sonic. I think actually this is the last example I'll use, and I actually don't think Nintendo and the Pokemon Company believed it would be as popular as it was, but I think Pokemon Legends Arceus, I mean, in English, some people say Arceus. I say Arceus because that's how it's pronounced in Japan. Um, I think that was it as well. It offered this new take on Pokemon where it's very much a Pokemon DNA game. It's all the DNA of Pokemon, but it's different and it's new and it's refreshing. And I think people loved it. Um, and I think that maybe I'm wrong, but I think it might have taken some people aback in a positive way. It was like, oh wow, people really love this, and they should. It's great. If you haven't played Pokemon Arceus or Pokemon Legends, you should definitely play it. Even if you're what I call the lapsed Pokemon fan, the people who played the first one, maybe played Gold and Silver and then walked away. You should play this one. It's great. It's absolutely brilliant. And no, I'm not paid by Nintendo or Pokemon to say that,
We
but it's
wish
great.
we can do
Yeah,
here,
I
but
wish.
we accept sponsorships, no problem. We can do.
But it's great, and I think it's a really great example of how you can take. And that's not to say you need to own an IP. That's an important thing here. You don't actually need to own the IP to do this. Indie developers can do this as well. If you're an indie developer who say grew up absolutely adoring The Legend of Zelda, look at The Legend of Zelda's DNA and then think, okay, what can we do with this type of game that's new, unique, different? Are you wanting to tell a different story through characters, but with, similar sorts of gameplay, or you want to offer a new spin on the gameplay, or, and you can take that with anything. Say you're a really big fan of, I don't know, BioWare style RPGs. What do you think that you can do that's slightly different here? You want that emotional connection, but maybe because maybe you're an indie developer, maybe you're not, if you are, maybe you need to tell a smaller, tighter experience. So how do we do that? I think in today's modern world where nostalgia is comfortable and that people want to just they don't want to take risks. I understand that as someone who can be risk averse at times. I think this is the easy way to take a risk is take the DNA of something that's comfortable and put a spin on it rather than trying to do what could be the scary thing and create something completely brand new. And I think really it's what a lot of the big companies are doing right now. And I totally understand why.
But there is a psychological reason for that as well. Like we, as human beings, we connect better with things that are comfortable for you,
Yeah,
for us, than com- everything that is unknown or very different, out of the ordinary, can interfere as well. Not only like can make us uncomfortable. So it goes back also with to the feeling that you want to create. You might want to create something completely different because that uncomfort is what you want to infer in your players. But if you want to have an instantaneous emotional connection, tackling the things that are like comfort food and like common zone for people, but then add extra things to it can be a great point. That's
Yeah,
exactly that. And psychologically it allows us to connect faster because there are things that you recognize as a natural for you.
yeah. I mean, part of the psychology of nostalgia, I should say to anyone listening that whilst it's very much lapsed, but my original degree was in psychology, but like part of the psychology of nostalgia is the idea of making is that it makes you feel safe. It makes you feel comfortable and safe. Maybe, that there's obviously multifacets to it and it doesn't always work the same for everyone, but the overriding thing around nostalgia is a feeling of safety, of comfortableness, of like no, nothing can harm me, and that's why we feel happy because we're sort of more freed. um and I think that's kind of important within gaming, is that idea of making you feel like safe. Now that sounds so strange when I've spent a lot of time talking about like a horror games or whether it's like a Soulsborne game. It's not about the content. It's about the fact that at its core, you feel comfortable and you're tapping into that level of enjoyment within a game. And I think that's kind of one of the overarching things to creativity, is to make the audience in some respects forget about the outside world. Now that obviously doesn't always work. A lot of the time we have a moral message that we're trying to tell that definitely impacts in the world. I don't mean disconnect from the real world in its entirety. I mean, what I'm trying to say is you want the person to be in the moment. Now, another great example that I can use that of a game I really love is Spec Ops: The Line. Now, it's kind of one of those cult classics that if you've played it, you'll remember it forever, but a lot of people didn't play it. And the thing about Spec Ops: The Line is it tells, I don't want to spoil this one for anyone who hasn't played it, but the thing about Spec Ops: The Line is it tells a story of sort of the descent of humanity in many respects, but and it left me with a feeling of definitely profoundness of in like humanity and what it tells us as a message about who we are and who people are and what people can do with the given a certain parameters and a certain set of situations, what people can be driven to. But whilst I was playing the game, I was within the game. And then afterwards, I considered those things. So I think even when you tell a message, it is also about making sure that people are within the moment and sort of absorbed in that experience. I think that's an important thing. And, you know, connecting that to what I was saying earlier, in many respects, for a lot of experience, that's about making people feel comfortable and safe and like they're having a good time and they're enjoying themselves.
Sure. I saw a presentation was, and if I butcher his name, he's gonna kill me later. But I think his surname was Ungoria, Javier Ungoria. I think is that from THQ Nordic that he was talking about game design and how to create this variation between tense and relaxed. And one thing that he was saying is when you're creating, especially if it is a big world where you a lot of unknowns, he was always talking about creating this up and downs of
Mm,
emotion that people need resting time, that
yeah.
you can't if you make a game which is tense 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 all the time, they will be more keen to leave it because it's too much. It ends up being beating the purpose of the game, because even if you want to play a game to because you like the challenge, human beings are not made to deal with the stress in a constant mode, to have the adrenaline high all the time, and that these up and downs allow these breathers and allow people to enjoy the environment and absorb the environment that they are in, instead of all the stress all the time. And like in stories, I think this is important as well. If you want to, I don't know, I don't know if you feel the same way. I think when we are under extreme stress, we are not able to absorb what is happening and understanding the 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 reality of things, even or the story of a game the same way, because we are always on this fight or flight mode. uh,
Yeah,
and this
I
is in
think
gaming in real life as well, I guess.
I think definitely. I think like clearly everything in that is spot on. I do though think that gaming has a unique opportunity to create moments of safety for the player from the stress whilst actually never dropping the tension. For example, a really good way that a lot of recent more cinematic action games, such as Uncharted or Batman or even Star Wars, Jedi Fallen Order, I'm sure Survivor does the same thing. I'm looking forward to starting that. Is you have these insane action moments. I think the one of the sort of peak things and examples would be Uncharted 2 Among Thieves, the scene in Nepal after you get out of the temple and the tanks are rolling in and attacking everything. And so you have these intense moments of action where it's like, especially if you're playing on the harder difficulties like I do, it's one wrong move and you're done. But then you'll move into a cinematic scene where you're still in control, but you subconsciously know as the player that, oh, this is a bit where I can't be killed because we're moving the story along here. Star Wars did the same thing at the start where, you're running from the Empire, but then there's moments where you'll, for example, see a jet fighter come in the background and start attacking the ship. So you now know that the control part of the game has shifted to the background. So you're now safe for a breather, but the action's still continuing. The story's still moving. I mean, it's a lot easier for RPGs, I would say, like Pokemon, Final Fantasy, well, maybe not, but classic Final Fantasy, because you get that break point where you're like, oh, it's their turn. Now it's my turn. Now it's their
Yeah.
turn. But I think even with the key action games, you can do it. Another great example would be spoiler warning to anyone who's not played Tomb Raider, the third one, Shadow of the Tomb Raider. There's a scene in it where she sort of gets dumped in the forest. The forest's on fire. She's sort of in rage, but she's also hurt and injured. Now at that point you can't be killed because there's no real enemies. You're just walking forward, but you can feel the emotion in Lara Croft. You can feel like the heat from the fires around her. You can hear the ferocity in her voice from what she's like, what you've just seen before, which I won't spoil if no one's played it. But also as a player, like, oh, this is my little rest bit. But also, you know, respites create unique opportunities that obviously one for another day, but I think there are points where you can subvert the narrative slightly. So I always remember one of the more amazing subverting the narratives would be Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, not the original one, not the remake, but the original one, where
My favorite.
you have the
It,
safe room and you're in this area where you think you're fairly safe because the way game development was built right then was you knew the enemies were in the room, and when the enemies weren't in the room, they weren't in the room. And Capcom created this system where Nemesis just like explodes through the window after you come out of the safe room at the
star.
at the bottom of the police station at Raccoon Police Department. And you've played Resident Evil 2. So in Resident Evil 2, this safe room for Leon and Claire is safe, and it's safe. And the game in Resident Evil 1 has also taught you that the safe rooms are safe. Now, the sanctity of the safe room is maintained, but you think you've cleared out the zombies outside. It's quiet. So you're just trying to trim, and then he smashes through the window. So there are opportunities also to subvert the narrative. And that's also an important mechanic in games. I remember when it first happened to me, I just ran back into the save room, and then I'm like, oh, I can hear him outside. But I
And
mean,
it creates
also,
memorable moments as
it
well. Like
does.
the Resident Evil, it doesn't matter what number of Resident Evil I play. After the three, I keep waiting to hear star, and
Yeah.
like I want that again because I had nightmares with that thing, and it would pop out everywhere. You never knew where it was going to pop. Yeah.
So yeah, so I mean, I'm sure we'll talk about it in the future, but I think also within game development, surprising the audience is also, it can be a very clever mechanic. It's not something that you necessarily have to do, but I think it can be quite powerful. And if you can leave a lasting impression, that's only ever, I think, a good thing. Well, what I mean by that is a positive lasting impression, of course.
So as we're almost in the end of it, I think there is a I wanted to end with a question of, if you could create the perfect game, no limitations, no money limitations, no team limitations, whatever you want to do, what kind of game would you like to create? It's
Wow,
a
what a
hard one to
question.
finish.
Yeah,
And
and it might be one that I have to come back to. Yeah, you
I
start.
can
You
start
go.
if you want to. I would like to create my original idea. Like, I always think about that. That first game idea that I had of creating a game to connect music fans with musicians. At the time that I had the idea, we didn't have metaverse. Like, mobile was super limited. If a game was more than 50 megabytes, you couldn't have it anywhere. Most of the cell phones couldn't support that. So doing several mini games inside of one game was un, we were one of the first people thinking of that, and it was undoable, which nowadays would be so easy to do. Like, everybody is doing that. And so I still have the thought that at some point, if I win the lottery and I have unlimited money, I would like to go back and do that, just because I still think in its core the idea is good, like the emotion is good. Fans want to connect with their musicians. They really want to be more to show themselves as valuable for their idols, more than just spectators of the whole uh, of the whole environment. It's just figuring out how the best way to do it, but I still like
Yeah,
that.
I think for me, it sort of really depends. And I think I know what your question is, but I just want to preface that if it was taking an existing IP and doing something different with an existing IP, such as Pokemon, Sonic the Hedgehog, whatever, I've got lots of ideas that I would do with that. But I think if we're looking for something that's kind of creative, is so one of my favorite television programs to anyone based in the UK, or not, but know of it, is a show called Inside Number Nine. It's an anthology series where it's short, 30-minute episodes that always have a twist and always say something, and they always leave you guessing until the end. I would like to take that idea of an anthology series and sort of recreate it within gaming. And some have done that. You have the Dark Pictures anthology with things like Man and Medan. And I think taking that idea, but also having like the same characters, but they're in different scenarios in each game, and there's sort of this mystery around how they connect. So one of the things in my mind would be that it's like I suppose if I'm giving away the secrets of it, because you'd learn it as you go along, it might be like a sort of quantum leap scenario or a multiverse scenario where it's like these are all the different directions that these people's lives could have taken. From a storytelling point of view, it's that. Now, from a gameplay point of view, I think what that would allow you to do is sort of create smaller experience that, again, take this comfort level of, I know the characters, I know the way it's built, I know the idea of what I'm meant to be doing. Maybe I'm meant to be unraveling why I'm in this time, like Quantum Leap, before I can jump to somewhere else. But you could do different little things within it. So it could be one of them is a mystery of why we're, something to do with the house or something. The other one could be, okay, now we're in, I don't know, a tennis tournament. I mean, that's a bit far reaching, but I think something that's super experimental, but that for some reason the characters and their stories are intimately linked between these stories, and it's about working out how, why, what's happening, and trying to bring it all together. I think a lot of games do that sort of stuff, that linking things. Assassin's Creed's another example, but I think I'd like to take it a bit more further and use it as an experimentation tool to see how crazy the scenarios could get.
That sounds super interesting. I would play that.
Thank you.
So
And you
so now we
and I was
need
just going to say, yeah,
investors give us money now so we can make
yeah.
games.
And what I would do is have them as kind of like shorter experiences. So like that would be the point of them. They're like, like tasters into it. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a cool idea because also the fact that you can um, cater both for the people that want to play for a lot of hours, for long hours, and the people that maybe has less time, and but they still want to have the same experience, and they can have bite size bite size experiences out of it. The English sometimes don't go the way it's supposed to go. But I think this is an amazing way to finish the first
Yeah.
episode. And next week we're back. Our idea is to do this every week, same time, same bat signal. Hopefully next week Charlie is with us, and I will be promoting through the normal social channels what we're gonna be talking, and also eventually we're gonna have guests and talk about fun things as well. But I hope you had as much fun as I did, Soph.
Yeah,
And
I did. Yeah, yeah, definitely. Thank you.
we like Sophia is gonna be hopefully Sophia is together with me next week as well as co-host. Sometimes it's gonna be Soph with other people as well. We're gonna make it really fun. So I'm very excited about this, and I hope you guys enjoyed as much as we did. So have a lovely week and see you next week.
Bye.